Hey, everybody. It's great to see you. I want to welcome those who are watching online. In particular, actually, my Aunt Faye and Uncle Arlo, who are in an assisted living home here in Bend, and they watch every week online. Hi, Aunt and Uncle. Well, we're in a series in the book of Ruth. We're in week 5 of a 6-week series, so next week will be the end week of this series. And let me kind of give you where we've been, and then we'll get to where we're going. So the book of Ruth is a really amazing book in the Old Testament about a family that flees Israel because of a famine. And it's Naomi and her husband Elimelech and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And they go to Moab to flee the famine, to try to find food. And so while they're there, though, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, dies. Not only that, but her 2 sons also die, leaving her and her 2 daughter-in-laws that her sons had married as widows. It gets to be pretty tough for Naomi, and so she decides to go back to Bethlehem. And Ruth insists, her daughter-in-law Ruth insists on going back with her. And so they go back to Israel, to Bethlehem, and they look for a relative that they can kind of be cared for, and they run into Boaz. And there's this amazing story in the book of Ruth of how Ruth and Boaz kind of meet, and they start to fall in love. And last week, Pastor Bo ended the message with this proposal, really, that Ruth makes to Boaz to be married to him. It's pretty brash and bold of Ruth, but she didn't tell us how that ended. And so today we're going to look at that. And before we get into that, I just want to say, I want to give like a high five to all the Blue groups. I've heard from Blue groups every single week through this series that it's been encouraging and challenging, and the discussions that you're having in the community have been worthwhile, and this series has been very practical. And even though sometimes we don't always agree on everything as well, the Blue groups are kind of stirring the pot and helping us get to where God wants us to be as a community. So way to go. In your Blue group this week, give everybody a high five on behalf of me. All right, Ruth chapter 3. Let's pick it up in Ruth chapter 3. If you have a Bible, you can follow along. It'll be on the screen, and I'm going to be reading from the Voice translation, and because it's a little bit more narrative focused. And so let's pick up the story, verse 12. Boaz is talking to Ruth. When Ruth came into his room, actually it's into the place where they're gleaning, where all the grain comes in, and Ruth uncovers Boaz's feet and lays down at the end of his bed. Now, I would not recommend this, ladies or men, single, either way, as an approach method for meeting someone. That's creepy. I just got to say that's creepy. But in this context, we'll go with it. And so this happens, right? And Ruth is really what she's doing is she's asking Boaz to marry her. And because Boaz is a distant relative to Naomi, her mother-in-law, and he actually has the responsibility and the right to marry Ruth, as we'll see in today's message. So verse 12, "You are right," Boaz says to Ruth, "that I am in line as a near relative of your family," which means I can marry you, "but I am not the only one." So a little tension, a little like competition starts to arise in the book of Ruth because there's someone else. And he says, "I'm not the most likely even," because he is not. There's another man who is more closely related to you than I am. There's someone that's more related. They're a little bit closer to Naomi than he is. And then Boaz in verse 13, "Spend the rest of the night here," and don't read into this. We're such a sexualized culture. You're all thinking, "Oh, I wonder what happened that night," you know? Nothing happened. The Bible is, when somebody has sex, they tell you. Okay, so they don't say it here. Just don't. I mean, if you want to read into it, whatever, but it's not there. So anyway, spend the rest of the night here, he says. And all the men are going like, yeah, whatever. In the morning, I will give him the chance, this other kinsman redeemer, that's the phrase we're going to look at today, a chance to act as your kinsman redeemer and redeem you and your family. If he's willing to do this, good. You can kind of hear Boaz like, I hope he doesn't, because he really likes Ruth. But if he is not willing to fulfill his responsibility, then as the Eternal One lives, I promise I will redeem your family by marrying you. Now remain here until morning comes. So Boaz, in essence, joyfully received Ruth's proposal for marriage. He wants to marry her. He had already looked at the legality of it because he knew that there was someone else more closely related to Naomi than he was. So he mentions that to Ruth, right? So he knows he's looked into this because he knows that he is a kinsman redeemer to Naomi and Ruth, but there's someone else that's more closely related. So what is this kinsman redeemer idea? It comes up in the Old Testament. Not only that, but this was actually a common practice in ancient lands, not just in the Jewish tradition. This idea of a kinsman redeemer. It's the Hebrew word goel. And what it is, let me just explain it. It's an ancient tradition where in the event of the death of a man without an heir, that a surviving brother or relative was obligated to redeem or marry the widow of the man who had died, have a son with her, and thereby raise up an heir for the deceased. Does that make sense? Now, this sounds really strange to us. I mean, imagine me asking my brother Mark, who lives in Burns, hey, Mark, if I die, I need you to marry my wife and have a kid. Okay, that's just not right. Really odd. But this ensured in ancient culture that the lineage would continue on of every family. And so that's what's happening here. So in Naomi's case, right, Elimelech, her husband dies, and they have two sons who are heirs, Mahlon and Chilion, but they both die, and they all die without any children. So in essence, Elimelech's lineage has ceased to be. There's no way for Elimelech's name to go on throughout history, and that was something unacceptable in ancient culture. So according to this custom, the next of kin to Elimelech would have the responsibility to be the kinsman redeemer, the one to marry Naomi, have a baby together, and thus continue the line. That's the idea. Is everybody with me? That's what kinsman redeemer is. But as we see here in this story, there's a little competition to Boaz because he's not the closest kinsman redeemer. Let's pick up the story again here in chapter 4, verse 1. So at that same time, Boaz went to the city gate. This is where they did business in the ancient culture, was at the gate. This is where all the kind of the legal stuff happened. And so he sat down there. Just then the kinsman redeemer, the one that he mentioned to Ruth, he had told Ruth about, walked by. And he says to him, my friend, come and sit down with me for a while. We've got some business to discuss. So the man came and sat down beside Boaz. And before he spoke further to the man, he gathered together 10 elders, got some witnesses in the room at the gate from the city, and asked them to preside there, which they did. And then Boaz says to the kinsman redeemer, you have heard of Naomi? She is the woman who recently returned from Moab. She is transferring her rights to the plot of land belonging to her deceased husband, our relative Elimelech. I wanted you to know about it because as a close family member, you have the first right to purchase it. If you want to do so, we have enough elders sitting here to witness the transaction. If you want to become the guardian and redeem this land, it is yours by right. But if you are not interested in doing this, tell me now. The right belongs to you, but if you refuse it here and now, then I am next in line. And the kinsman redeemer says, of course, I exercise my option to redeem this land. So why would he respond so quickly to accepting this? Because it enlarged his property. He's looking at it from a business kind of point of view, and he realizes that if he becomes a kinsman redeemer, then all of Elimelech's land that they have owned would belong to him. And not only that, but Naomi would also. So one of the stipulations is that he gets to marry Naomi. And then Naomi, if she ever had a child, then that child would own the land, not the kinsman redeemer. Does that make sense? So the land would stay in Elimelech's lineage, not this other guy's, the kinsman redeemer. So he's thinking, Naomi, she can't have any more children. She's past the age of childbearing. And so he's thinking, I'll do this. I'll be the right stand-up guy, but the land's going to revert to me because Naomi can't have any more children. She won't have an heir for Elimelech. But Boaz has got something up his sleeve. This guy's shrewd, smart, and he really loves Ruth, and he wants this land, but more he wants Ruth. So, verse 5. Now, just so you know, Boaz says, on the day you buy this plot of land from Naomi, right, you will also acquire who? Ruth, the Moabitess. She is the dead man's widow. And you're thinking, well, no, Elimelech's widow is Naomi, and the land belongs to Elimelech. But follow me. Elimelech died. Who did the land transfer to at that moment? Mahlon. And Mahlon married who? Ruth. So when Mahlon dies, actually the one who needs to be redeemed is not Naomi, but Ruth. And so he missed this guy that we don't know his name because he's a deadbeat lame-o guy that's not going to, no, the Bible doesn't say that. I'm totally reading into it. I'm pretty sure he's a deadbeat, but I don't know that for sure. Anyway, he didn't connect the dots like Boaz had. So Boaz kind of waited a little while, and brought this up. And then he says, it will be your responsibility to make sure she has children, Ruth, so that they can carry on her dead husband's name with the inheritance. And Ruth is absolutely in childbearing age, and she will most certainly have a child who will then become the heir apparent to Elimelech through Mahlon, and the land that this kinsman redeemer will revert to the heir's lineage, to the heir's property. Does that make sense? So then the kinsman redeemer says, and then I'm not going to be able to redeem it. I'm out. Why? Because not only will he lose that property, and you're thinking, well, he never had it to begin with, but not only that, he, as a kinsman redeemer, he's responsible not just for the property, but for the family, for Naomi, for Ruth, for all of Ruth's descendants. He has to make sure that they're taken care of. So now he realizes that his own property that he already has is at risk. And so he says, I will not put my own property at risk. I will relinquish my right to redeem the land. You do it, which everybody can say, yeah, because that's where we want the story to go. We want Boaz and Ruth to be together, not this deadbeat that we don't even know his name, right? So that's what happens, right? So then, verse 9, the kinsman redeemer says to Boaz, it's now your responsibility, because Boaz, he wants this, right? And so he says to the elders and all the people, every one of you have witnessed what happened here today. I secured the rights to everything that belonged to Elimelech and his sons, Mahlon and Chilion, from Naomi. I have also taken responsibility for Ruth, the woman from Moab, who is married to Mahlon. She will become my wife. I will see to it, listen to this is amazing, that his family and this city remember Mahlon. It's not about Boaz. It's not about his lineage. It's about what comes from Ruth and from Mahlon. I will raise children who will bear his name and make sure his property stays in the family. You are all witnesses to this today. And actually, Mahlon's name doesn't show up in most of the rest of the Bible, but Ruth's does, and we'll talk about that next week. But this is a great story. That Boaz says, I'll be the kinsman redeemer. I'll be the one to step in. And the primary application of this entire narrative of the book of Ruth is that Jesus now is our kinsman redeemer. Every single one of us can be redeemed by Jesus because he is our closest relative. I love how Galatians chapter 4 says this, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, kin to us, close to us, from born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. He is our kinsman redeemer. He has set us free from sin and the effects of sin. He has set us free from the bondages that we struggle with in this life. He is our kinsman redeemer, and that is the primary point of the book of Ruth. And I'll talk more about that next week. But today I want to look at a different application point that I think is important as well. It's an interesting study as you look through the book of Ruth of the importance of family. And even to look at it as maybe as the church's family. For Ruth and Naomi, when they hit ground zero, they looked for family. Because for them, that's where they were going to be taken care of. There was going to be protection, a sense of belonging, purpose. Would flow out of family. And it was the same in the early church. It was the same when Jesus went back to heaven, left his disciples to do the work of the ministry. Many who came to follow Jesus in those early days had to leave their home, their family, their belongings. They were shunned by their community. And many of them, all they had was the church. It became their family. Widows and orphans were taken care of. People sold property and gave it to the church. Tithes and offerings were given to distribute to the poor that was among them. This was their family. This was their point of security and safety and provision and purpose. The Old Testament says that God puts orphans into families. And would you with me, would you welcome those that got baptized today into the family of God, right? This is so great. It's exactly what happened. It was like this embrace, and throughout the New Testament, what's really interesting is that throughout the New Testament, the language changes from like disciple-oriented, like I'm a disciple of Jesus, that still shows up, but it changes more to kinship language, that we are part of the family of God, and all of us are brothers and sisters in Christ, that God is our Father and Jesus is our brother. I mean, this is the kind of language that saturates the New Testament after the resurrection of Jesus. Family is one of the most, if not the most dominant metaphor in the New Testament for the church. One commentator even went so far as to say that the church is not like a family, it is a family. Family was the primary way the early church identified themselves. But here's the problem. Most of us, our experience of church falls incredibly short of that. And I think there's a few reasons. And I want to give you these reasons. I'm not going to talk a lot about these, but these are maybe in your blue groups. You can write these down and discuss them more fully in your blue groups. Maybe you might disagree with me that these are some of the reasons why we've struggled in the church for the church to be a family, not just this church, but most every church. And I'm going to give you 5 reasons, but I'm just going to do it really fast. So just write these down if you want to think about them more later. Here's the first one. We are fiercely independent. Now, I don't think these reasons are necessarily bad or wrong. I just think there are reasons why we don't experience family in the context of our church relationships as much. A friend of mine, Carrie Brown, she wrote a Facebook post. She quoted Brene Brown, and this is what she wrote. I think it was Brene Brown who told a story about a village where all the women washed clothes together down by the river. And when they all got washing machines, there was a sudden outbreak of depression. And no one could figure out why. It wasn't the washing machines in and of themselves. It was the absence of time spent doing things together. It was the absence of community, and this is what Carrie wrote. Friends, we've gotten so independent. We're fine, we tell ourselves, even when in reality we're depressed, we're overwhelmed, we're lonely, and we're hurting. We're fine, and we're just too busy right now, we say when days, weeks, months, and years go by without connecting with friends. I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. It's so easy to say, even when it's not true. We have become so isolated, and it's hard to know how to get back. It's so hard to know how to even begin to build the kind of relationships our heart needs. And I think in our current culture, it's just not as organic as it once was. It's more work now. Because she finishes, we have our own washing machines. We don't depend on each other to do laundry or cook dinner or raise babies anymore. We don't really depend on each other for much of anything, if we're being honest. See, we are fiercely independent, and I believe that works against this idea of community and belonging and family in the context of the church. A second reason I think that our experience falls short of the family ideal mentioned in the New Testament is because we have our own families and all of their responsibilities that come along with that. And again, I don't think that's bad, right? It's what it is. I did a little math project this before the service. I was curious. I wondered how many of my blood relatives live on my street and in my block. 19. I didn't ask for it. I didn't even invite them. They decided to move here on my street. I mean, they could have lived anywhere. I mean, I encouraged East Bend is cheaper over there, and just move over there. We live over by New Hope Church. It's really expensive in my area. No, they moved right next door. 19 of them. It's awesome. It's just, it adds a level of complexity, right, to our lives for those of you that have family in the area. And that can work against this idea of family in the church. A third thing that kind of keeps us constrained is that the church today is hierarchical. You've got Jesus, but then you've got, in the Catholic tradition, you've got the Pope, the cardinals, the bishops, the priests, and then everybody else. It's not that much different in our denomination. We've got a president, we've got a general supervisor, we've got the district supervisors, we've got the divisional superintendents, we got me, and then we got everybody else. I mean, that's our organizational structure. And so what happens, and we don't even, it's almost like we don't even think about it, but we look to certain people to do certain things for us, like provide family. And if Steve can't do it, and if the church can't, corporately do it, then I don't experience it. But the view that Jesus had was much more of a flat org chart. It was much more egalitarian. He was constantly pushing down responsibility for creating community to those around him. So that's one. The church is hierarchical. Here's a fourth one. The church is typically more concerned about statements of faith than statements of family. What I mean by that is that we prioritize dogma over relationships. Matter of fact, I remember the day when we used to say to family members, like blood relatives, that if they lived a certain way or did certain things, that as a follower of Christ, we couldn't have anything to do with them. So we put doctrine over relationships. We put in a sense, our ideologies above relationship. And I see that reversed now today, actually. I just read an article where a young family won't let their kids see their grandkids because their grandparents are so conservative. They're just no relationship. See, humanity has a tendency to put doctrine over relationships, statements of faith over statements of family. And here's the fifth one. I didn't mention this in the last service, so you guys get a bonus. But I'm going to talk more about this with our young adults on Tuesday night, so I'm going to include it here. Marriage is seen as the ultimate destination. What I mean by that is that today in the church, that if you're not married, there's a sense that you're less than. And churches are either built around married people or around single people. You don't really see churches that are effective in bridging the two groups. And that narrative has to change. I'm not going to talk about that, but I believe that's another barrier to why we don't experience family, is because marriage is seen as the ultimate destination. Well, that should produce some conversations in blue groups, Mike. So what do we do in light of this? There's two things that I want to, as application points. The first one's, it's like common sense almost. Take care of your family first. Take care of your blood family first. If a widow has children or grandchildren, Paul wrote to Timothy, these should learn, first of all, to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Our families need to come first. So this message is not to like oppose that idea. Maybe it's ensuring your aging parents are well taken care of, making sure the Naomis in your life are set up well. Maybe it's ensuring the emotional and physical and spiritual needs of your kids are being met by you, by the family unit, not just leaving that up to the school systems or the church systems to provide for your children. Healthy families create healthy communities in school, in church, in society. I do believe that. But what about the church as family? Here, I want to give you a simple one thing, profound in my opinion, to help create church that is not just like a family, but is a family. It's one thing, you could actually do it today. You could start doing this, practice today. Open up your home to others. Open up your home to others. You know, we know in the early church that entire households came to know Jesus at once. Some of you might remember the story of Cornelius in Acts chapter 10. Cornelius came to Jesus, but all of his kids, his brothers and sisters, siblings, they were all there, and they all came to know Jesus as a family. But we also know that the early church met together, multiple families coming together and met in homes together. And in my opinion, we've got to get back to this culturally. I'm not even talking just in the church. I think we have to get back to this idea that I think the future growth and effectiveness of the church, but also just society in general, is dependent on this one shift where we got to get back to opening up our home to others, where the home becomes where the church's mission takes place, where we extend hospitality, where we raise up our kids in the way that they should go, where we cook meals and share them together with those in our community, where we share our faith and where we challenge each other. Many of you are doing that in your blue groups. Maybe it's time to extend those blue groups to more than 6 weeks and continue to build community. Home is where, for me personally, is where we invite the neighborhood kids and let them eat through my grocery budget in one day. My 15-year-old has a lot of friends. I guess that's good. And what I love is that my wife and I have chosen, we didn't do this with every kid, we've chosen to open up our homes. Our house is the hangout place. And we better have some food in the house or it won't be the hangout place. You know, it's opening up our hearts to those that maybe don't have a home. or a family. I read an article recently that stated Christian families should be strong at the core but flexible around the edges, a sense of like inviting people in. My mother-in-law, Georgina, is way better at this than I am. She lives a stone's throw from my house, as I mentioned earlier, which is great. And I've never thrown a stone at her house. I know that's what you were thinking right then. I've thought about it, but I've never done it. Just kidding. But she's way better at this. She does a thing called Sunday family dinners, and it has family in the name. Interesting. So when I show up, it's once or twice a month I show up. I always show up. Most of the time I show up. It's on Sunday. We have Sunday night service. Anyways, that's my life. It's complicated. I'm getting over it. Anyway, when I get to lunch, I walk in and I'm like, who's that over there? That's not an uncle or an aunt or a brother or sister. What Georgina does is she invites young adults that are in her grandkids' lives to family dinner. And they become part of our family. And it's such a and by the way, if you invite a young adult into your house, you're not just inviting them, you're inviting their 3 friends. So just FYI on that. Beautiful. It's this beautiful connection. I was thinking of Pastor Ken and Linda Johnson, who were the former pastors of this church. They pastored this church for almost 28 years. And I met Ken when I was 10 years old. He was the pastor of my church in Redmond. And he invited my family in close and mentored me. Even last week, I met with him. I'm almost 50 years old, and I'm still needing a spiritual dad in my life. We need spiritual fathers and mothers, spiritual brothers and sisters to help us in this life that are not always related to us. We need people that we can come into contact with, that we can call at any time and ask them for help or for wisdom. There are people in our church family who either don't have family in the area or who come to church alone because their family won't come with them. And often they come in alone, and unfortunately, often they leave alone. We no longer wash our clothes down by the river. We all have our own homes behind our own fences. We're all tired. We're all busy. We all have our own jobs and our own families, but we are disconnected, unhappy, and even depressed. And the solution isn't easy, but it is in our hands. What if we opened up our hearts and our homes to be inclusive of others, to invite not only our kids' friends into our house, but our kids' friends' parents into our house, to look for opportunities to invite single young adults or a single mom or a dad or someone who's at our church without their family to lunch after church. You could do that today, or grabbing coffee with that guy or that girl that you met at the gym that you just know that they need a little bit more touch from you. Some say yes, just say some yeses this week and give some brave invitations. Some of you need to give an invitation and some of you need to be like Ruth and go, can I come over? I sit next to you like every week, and some of you younger people are like, can I come over to your house? Like Ruth, have the boldness to invite yourself over. I'm going to tell you about a story of that, and that happened to me in just a minute. But this is what Naomi did. This is what Boaz did. This is what Ruth did. This is the kind of openness that will give us and others the opportunity to be kinsmen redeemers. I get this a lot. This phrase, I hear this a lot. Steve, I just want to meet with you. I'm not your papa. You know what I'm saying? That was supposed to be funny. Nobody laughed. I figured nobody did. Nobody did in the last service either, and nobody will in the next service. But seriously, this church has to be about more than just one person or a staff of people. It has to be about all of us saying yes to this invitation to invite people and be inclusive and say, yeah, you're welcome. I'm not saying do this to everyone. Just find one person to include, to invite, to be part of your family. Now, I'll never ask you to do something I won't do. So we hired a girl in her mid-20s from Southern California last year. Her name is Ariana, and you've seen her around. She does a little bit in worship, but she's mostly over in our youth department. She's an amazing leader, an incredible gift to our church. And Ariana, she ended up moving into the neighborhood too. I mean, that's just what everybody does. Yeah. I'm not going to tell you where I live because I'm afraid you're all going to start buying houses around me. Anyway, but she lives with my niece. on our street, and now she calls me neighbor. I'm not Pastor Steve, I'm neighbor. And so, hey neighbor, every time we see each other, hey neighbor. And when she moved from Southern Cal, she moved in the middle of winter last year, and she drove up her car and realized very quickly that she did not have the right tires. She didn't even know what the right tires were. She was like, there's other tires, and so my wife began to adopt Ariana and made sure that she got tires, and I think we even helped pay for them, and made sure that she was set up for the winter here, had the right clothes. She didn't even have the right clothes, right? She's from Southern Cal. And so made sure all of that. And then earlier this year, Ariana had a procedure at the hospital, and her mom wasn't able to be there. And so Suzanne, my wife, shows up, and I came by to visit, and we're embracing this girl as I think Suzanne wants to adopt her. I'm like, I don't think we can adopt her. She already has parents, and they're still in the picture, and she just loves this girl, though, And I'm like, I don't think she can be our kid. I'm just saying, but we can treat her as and embrace her as one of our own. So then she's so great. She's been wanting to make tamales for me and my family. And so this last Thursday, she brought over homemade tamales and enchiladas, and it was amazing. The enchiladas were a little spicy. They were spicy. They were a little spicy. Anyways. They were so good, Ariana. They were so good. And she hung out with us on Thursday, and then she's a huge USC fan. So anyway, so we invited her over for the Ducks game. Actually, she invited herself over. I think she wanted to be in the room when USC beat the Ducks. She left at halftime. Anyway, it's just family. She's family. You can be a USC fan and a Duck fan. There's family, and you have differences, but to embrace each other, to adopt one another, because there are Arianas all over Westside Church, sitting next to you, volunteering beside you in your blue group. And in the most cases, the church won't replace family, but the gospel can and should reorient our family relationships. And in turn, these new relationships will strengthen our church. So rather than seeing yourself as a guest or some kind of a visitor at Westside Church, will you see yourself as a host? That this is not Steve's church or Suzanne's church. This is our church. And you are an equity holder in it. You're not a customer. You're part of this. That's how I see you. That's how Jesus sees you. And together we can provide family for all who, like Ruth, are looking for a home. Jesus, we thank you for your word today. And we thank you, we celebrate for the family that has been enlarged through baptism today. And Lord, I pray that you would challenge us and inspire us to create space in our hearts and in our homes for one or two others that maybe don't have a place and don't have family and don't have a sense of belonging. Would you give us eyes to see those around us and in our church community and in our city as a whole, for the people that you're asking us to open up our homes and our hearts to, and give us inspiration and availability and provision for all of that. We thank you for that in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, would you guys stand with me? And I want to speak a blessing over you and around family. And before I do that, I just want to invite you, if you have any prayer requests at all, the prayer team is available over to my right and up here in the front. They would love to pray with you. Any needs you have, financial, emotional, relational, whatever it might be, they would love to pray with you. And then next week is our epic conclusion to the book of Ruth, and I'm super excited about that message. I hope you can come back for that. But this is a blessing of St. Mark from the 2nd century church. O sovereign and almighty Lord, bless all your people and all your flock. Give your peace, your help, your love unto us, your servants, the sheep of your fold, that we may be united in the bond of peace and love, one body and one spirit, in one hope of our calling, in your divine and boundless love. God bless you guys. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.